All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the 2023-2024 proposed service year changes virtual public hearing with the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District. My name is Allison Haynes. I'm the customer support specialist here at the district. I will be hosting this webinar and monitoring for feedback from our passengers and any questions you may have during the presentation. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click or tap on the Q&A button and enter your questions in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring those during the presentation, and we will get those answered for you either in the Q&A box, or we will send them over to our planning team who can address those for you all live here during the presentation. So unless we want to give it a couple more minutes for a few more attendees to show up, I will turn this presentation over to Dave Goldenbaum, who is our service planner.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. So let's go ahead and start. This is being recorded, so if anyone is joining late, you can certainly review anything that you might have missed. Anyway, hello, welcome. And this is MTD's live virtual public hearing for proposed service changes. My name is Dave Goldenbaum. As Allison said, I'm a service planner here at MTD. I'm being joined today by Dan Sapphire, an analyst planner with MTD. I'll start with the presentation, and Dan's going to pick up on the second part of it. So in this meeting, Dan and I are going to be reviewing MTD's proposed changes for our new service year beginning this fall. This is an annual process which coincides with the beginning of the new school year for the University of Illinois, Unit 4 and District 116 public schools in our community, and when MTD plans improvement changes to our routes and schedules. Next slide, Dan. MTD, let's see here. We'll go through the overview. In overview, we'd like to discuss the status of MTD's workforce shortage, resulting in continuing service cuts, along with a review of our ongoing service restoration plan. And after that, the majority of the presentation will focus on service changes proposed to begin in August as a part of our regular fall service. Next slide. Thank you. So to provide our full service, MTD presently budgets for a total of 220 operators, 139 full-time and 81 part-time. As you can see from the slide, 3.5 years ago, our vacancy rate was only 6.8%. This was fairly typical as far as vacancy pre-pandemic, and while it's never ideal, we were always able to provide our full service with this staffing level. Beginning in 2020, our vacancy rate has been a lot closer to 20% and remains there as of October 2022, in spite of our diligent efforts to fill these positions. I'd also like to remind our viewers that the operator shortage we're experiencing is not unique to MTD. Transit agencies all across the country have been experiencing very similar vacancy rates and service cuts. MTD presently has 184 operators and a vacancy rate of 16.4%. So we're beginning to make some progress, but there's still a long way to go. Next slide, please. As we continue to gain more operators, this slide illustrates MTD's plan to restore cut service. Surplus operators are going to be assigned as backups on the highest ridership routes. These additional shifts will be closely monitored as they stabilize, and we can then begin to restore cut service. Restoration will be prioritized on the basis of ridership, headways, and community demand. The key word on this slide is stability. When MTD restores service, we need to ensure that it will run reliably and not simply be cut again on days that we don't have sufficient operators. Next slide, sir. So moving on to our first scheduled fall service change, MTD is proposing some routing and schedule changes to the 14 Navy to help with on-time performance. The 14 Navy route has noticeable schedule adherence issues in the morning and afternoon, which are largely associated with the routing for Curtis Meadows and that trip. The current 14 West and 14 East routings for Curtis Meadow trips are shown on this slide. Presently, Carl at the Fields is served twice at these times, once as a westbound and then once as an eastbound Navy. During the rest of the day, Carl at the Fields is only served one time, which has been sufficient for ridership demands. Based on our ridership analysis, we believe that this second trip is not necessary and is a contributing factor to delays on the rest of the route. Next slide. To keep the Navy on time, MTD is proposing only one trip to Carl at the Fields during the Curtis Meadow schedule. Carl will be served by the 14 West Navy only during that westbound trip. MTD is also proposing routing changes to get from Carl at the Fields to Mullican Drive. The current left turn from Fields Drive South to Windsor Road can regularly cause delays due to traffic patterns. So moving the routing to use Healthcare Drive and Staley Road will avoid these delays by utilizing a controlled intersection and should be safer than the current left turn, which has some visibility issues as well. On the return 14 East trip, the Navy will turn back down Field South Drive to serve the YMCA and then turn around using Windsor West Apartments. So we will be serving that area a second time through. The time saved by curtailing this trip on the 14 East will be added to the Navy schedule to improve on-time performance. And that brings us to our next slide. The current 14 Navy schedule is shown on the left side of this slide and is in all black text. The proposed schedule shown on the right. The red text illustrates changes we are suggesting to the schedule. The midday schedule has not changed. So first, we've pushed back the starting time on the 14 West at Illinois Terminal to begin at 7:45 a.m. This bus has to wait for the universal transfer to clear before serving Illinois Terminal, and routinely does not begin until 7:45, and actually is part of the start of the adherence issues on the route. Even with this later start, the first trip should return to the terminal earlier than it used to because of the extra time built into the schedule from removing that second trip to Carl at the Fields. Notice on the new 14 East schedule that Carl at the Fields is not being served, and that the YMCA is still listed as Timepoint. Also notice that there are now several more trips that follow the same time patterns as the midday trips. And this should allow more time for passengers to reach their destinations, make transfers, and should be a lot easier to remember. And as a final point on this slide, the changes that you see depict a reduced service with only one Navy bus. As service is restored and the second Navy is added back in, it will follow a similarly revised schedule. Next slide. So moving on to the next scheduled fall service change, MTD is proposing new routing on the 110 Ruby to serve Farm and Fleet during the evening and weekends. So this slide shows the current routing to Farm and Fleet area. The 11 North Weekday daytime Ruby is presently the only service offered to this area with a stop at the southwest far side of Napleton and Anthony and uses a van. And the current evening and weekend routings for the 110 North Ruby is shown on the right side and does not serve Anthony, Willow Road, or Airport Road west of Cunningham due to weight restrictions for our 40-foot coaches. The Cunningham and Napleton intersection is very busy, wide, and is not pedestrian friendly, so that makes access to Farm and Fleet in that area impractical by bus on evenings and weekends. Next slide. So Farm and Fleet has agreed to allow MTD access to their property, and this will permit us to provide service to this area on evenings and weekends when we operate the 40-foot coaches in this route. Our proposed routing shown on this slide will include a new stop at the northwest far side of Napleton and Anthony and includes a turnaround on the south side of Farm and Fleet. Next stop, please, or slide. Thank you. The new schedule for the evening and weekend 110 North Ruby will remain largely unchanged. We're planning on using the 2-minute layover time that's built in at Airport and Cunningham to provide the new service to Farm and Fleet, keeping the rest of the schedule unaltered. The new resulting service will include 4 new weekday evening trips, and on the weekends, 17 new Saturday trips and 10 new Sunday trips. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I'm going to turn things over to Dan Sapphire at this point, and he's going to continue.
Thanks, Dave. Dan Sapphire here. I can lead us through the rest of the presentation. The next thing we want to talk about is a change to the 3 Lavender, specifically the north trips on weekdays that go up to Interstate and Research. So previously, currently, these trips head west on Interstate up to Newton and then comes south on Farber before returning for a southbound trip. However, now this Newton extends all the way to Boardwalk. So we are proposing changing this route from going south on Farber to continuing east on Newton until Boardwalk. And that would allow us to serve Hyundai and Amazon, which are some newer patrons, I guess, of this area. It would lead to the removal of our stop at Farber and Searle, which is about 500 feet from the next closest stop on Newton. And we would add a stop on the southwest corner here by Boardwalk and Newton. We're also proposing a change in schedule to the weekend Lavender. No change in the routing here. However, the weekend Lavender does tend to run late in the afternoon when traffic picks up for shopping and more ridership. We see that it gets really late at the beginning of trips leaving northbound, leaving Illinois Terminal, leaving downtown Champaign, and then it also runs late southbound in the afternoon, leaving Champaign Walmart. We looked at this and then reached out to Lavender riders by riding the bus and surveying them, asking a few questions about what they'd like to see if we developed a new schedule, asking what routes they'd like to transfer to, if they had ideas that could improve the Lavender. And based off our own internal data on ridership and schedule adherence and passenger feedback from the survey, we're recommending a schedule that will improve the Lavender's schedule adherence on weekends, but it will also affect transfers to other routes in the afternoon. So here I'll talk about kind of the takeaways from the onboard survey. We asked riders to rank what they cared most about and what they cared least about out of 5 different factors. And overall, passengers cared most about stops being close to their origin or destination, so not having to walk very far to a bus stop. And then they also cared most about bus frequency, how often the bus came. Passengers cared least about how long the trip took in terms of waiting for a transfer or if the bus was running slow. And then the least important factor of all was the ease of transferring to another route. When we asked the passengers how the Lavender could be improved, most said they would like evening service or for the bus to run on time. Currently, with our operator shortage, we don't have the resources to commit to evening service and a service expansion, but modifying the schedule so that the Lavender on weekends can run on time is something we can do and wouldn't require extra resources. Even though passengers said transferring to other routes was the least important of their concerns, we did want to see what routes passengers were transferring to the most, because any change to the Lavender schedule will affect how you can make transfers to other routes at Illinois Terminal. So we see kind of overwhelmingly Lavender riders like to transfer to and from the 70 gray, and then also to the green, the 50 green. So the Lavender's a north-south route. It makes sense that passengers would want to get to an east-west route. Another thing we asked passengers was what their ideal scenario was, if they would like to wait less than 5 minutes for their second bus when transferring, but sometimes it gets missed. If they'd like to wait a little bit longer, 5 to 10 minutes, but it's a pretty reliable transfer, or wait 10 to 15 minutes for the second bus, but never miss the transfer. And overwhelmingly, people would wait up to 10 minutes, but have a reliable transfer. And this is important for us because our hub and spoke system is really set up around a 5-minute transfer window, so that we minimize transfer times, which is great when everything runs on time. But with our operator shortage right now, routes are tending to run late and breaking a lot of transfers. So with this feedback in mind, we developed an alternative schedule that we're proposing now that will allow more reliable transfers. So here on the left, I have the Saturday Lavender in the schedule that we're proposing for the afternoon. So you can see northbound trips leaving Illinois Terminal. I've shaded in yellow those times that we are proposing to change. This is what we call recovery time. So whereas previously the Lavender would leave at 12:27 or 12:28, we're saying no, let's leave at 12:30, and that will allow 3 minutes at Illinois Terminal for a driver to stand up to recover any lost time that they may have run late southbound. And then, as I mentioned previously, leaving downtown Champaign northbound takes a little bit longer in the afternoon because of ridership and traffic. And so we're adding an extra minute to get to Bloomington at Home Depot. On the southbound trip, during peak hours, we're adding a minute at Walmart. So instead of arriving at 1 p.m. and then leaving at 1 p.m., we're giving our drivers 1 minute of recovery time so that if they're running a little late, they can make up some of that and not run as late beginning their southbound trip. On Sundays, we're really following the same philosophy. However, it's a little less extensive because the problems aren't as bad on Sunday. Ridership is lower, traffic is lower. So we believe that this schedule will really help the Lavender run on time. However, if you look at the left-hand column at Illinois Terminal, it does make departure times from Illinois Terminal a little irregular. And this will mean that transferring to other routes in the afternoon will be different than transferring to them in the morning. Whereas every other route serving Illinois Terminal has 30-minute frequency through Illinois Terminal, the Lavender will now have sometimes a 32 or 33-minute frequency, which will mean maybe it's really easy to transfer to or from the green in the morning, but not as easy in the afternoon. However, that does open new possibilities like transferring to the yellow or the red. So that is what we're proposing. We think running on time will benefit every rider, even those that are transferring, because right now the Lavender has a lot of broken transfers in the afternoon because it runs late. Moving on to some smaller scale changes. One is about school trips. So right now we have a 16B pink school trip that serves Inverness and Cobblefield, and also the 5 West Green Express #2 Copper Ridge serves Inverness and Cobblefield. We're proposing that only the 5 West Green Express serve Inverness and Cobblefield because fewer passengers ride this trip and it gets to Inverness and Cobblefield faster than the pink. And the pink has excessive passenger loads at times. So by separating these two, everyone who wants to get to Inverness and Cobblefield will need to take the Green Express. However, they will get there faster, and it should improve the passenger experience on the pink as well, as it'll be less crowded. Another change we're proposing is to modify the Transit Plaza time point on the 8 Bronze to the Illini Union time point. This is not a substantial schedule change. In fact, the schedule doesn't change at all, just kind of how we describe it. What this will allow us to do is start this 3:43 trip at Illini Union instead of Transit Plaza, which will be very helpful because it tends to run late right now. but making this change will help that one trip stay earlier, and shouldn't affect the route. Another change we're proposing is to restore the clockwise line on Saturday, the 180A line. We cut this due to MTD's operator shortage. However, we want to restore it because, as you can see in this lighter lime color, the 180 or the clockwise serves the YMCA and kind of the southern part of the route by Windsor, whereas the lime B goes up to Parkland. On Sunday, which has both the clockwise and counterclockwise right now, it shares the same route. There's no unique destination served. So we're proposing restoring this Lime A on Saturdays and then cutting the Lime A on Sundays. And what that'll allow us to do is maintain coverage on Sundays, although there will be lower frequency on Sundays, and improve coverage on Saturdays and improve coverage on Saturdays. Another change we're proposing is to make the southwest far side corner of Church and Lincoln an I-stop, so passengers would not be required to pay a fare or show their I-card here. We're doing this primarily because the ridership is very similar to 1 Illinois North and South on North Lincoln. It's more than 95% student ridership, and the Illini is suffering schedule adherence issues, and we believe this will help with the route. And by using, the front and rear door to board, we're hoping that the buses serving this stop will not have to wait as long for passengers to board and alight. And with that, we can take any questions, comments, or discussion. We'll also be at Illinois Terminal on Wednesday and accepting feedback online on our website during this week and whenever you'd like to submit comments.
Thank you, Dan and Dave. I know we did not break in the middle of the presentation to ask if there were any questions about any of these proposals in particular. We do have a written description of each of these changes posted on our public hearing webpage at mtd.org. That will be up for this week. We will post the recording of this presentation on that same page as soon as it's available. So you can view this again if you have questions or would like to hear about changes again. You can call us with your feedback at 217-384-8188. You can submit your feedback online through our website, through our Contact Us page. You can send written feedback to the attention of Carl Gannett at 1101 East University Avenue here in Urbana. And again, you can come see us in person on Wednesday afternoon at the Illinois Terminal in downtown Champaign. We will be available from 4 to 7 on Wednesday afternoon and evening, and you can tell us about your questions or your feedback, or you can fill out a written comment card while you are there. So Dan and Dave, we do have a question that came into our Q&A. If you would like to take a minute and look at that. From Mark McCarthy, give us just one moment and we'll review your question.
Yeah, hi, Mark. I'm going to attempt to answer your question for you. Thanks for giving us a second to read through everything. So for those who may not have a chance to read it, Mark is a disabled rider, and he uses the 1 South to get to his office on the university campus. But now he has to use the 24 link, and there's a transfer associated with this, and he has some concerns about that. So I can certainly appreciate that. I mean, we try really hard to make sure that we have as many, one-stop rides here or destinations so that you don't have to transfer. This particular change that we made kind of ended up serving a little bit of a bigger picture in terms of routing on campus, and also it allowed us to separate out the yellow from the yellow hopper and not have to run that service year round, which was a more efficient approach for us. So I don't have plans to have the yellow go back down to that area at this point. What I would suggest, certainly regarding your concerns, if you do run into any type of a scenario where there is not enough room on one of those links or yellows that you transfer to, please talk to our operators. They can get a show bus out there to pick you up, and we don't want to leave you out in the weather. We do have the shelters at E14, but I realize that they're still largely outdoors. So on those cold winter days, I completely appreciate where you're coming from. But our operators are definitely, concerned. They want to get everybody on route, as do we, and they will be glad to talk to you and arrange alternative transportation if they are too full. I will also say that we monitor the status of our buses right now in terms of ridership. So if we are full, the operators will call in advance. We'll try to send that turn bus out. We also know some of these routes, during certain times of the day do get full, and we try to get ahead of them too. So we're continually trying to make sure that you have that seat. I hope that answers your question. Let me know if you have any more concerns, and we'd be glad to address them.
Thank you, Dave. Do any other attendees this afternoon have any questions that we might be able to answer for you today? So we have a question about the contract with Unit 4. Dave, I think you've been working with Unit 4, have you, this year?
Yeah, that's something that both Dan and I work pretty regularly on here. And the answer to that question, Tracy, is definitely not a quick one. It's there's a lot of factors that go into the service that we provide. Right now, the main one is still dealing with our operator shortage. And we try to, we've combined some routes to try to be a little bit more efficient, but the bottom line is we have to have seats and enough room on those buses to get the kids to and from school. And we're very conscious of that. As far as adding additional routes system-wide right now, we are not in a position to do much of that until we start getting our operators, back more towards that 220 number that we were talking about earlier. So again, we've got a little bit of work to do on that, but as we do, we want to continue to make sure that we have, provided sufficient service for the schools. They're an important partner for MTD, and we take that very seriously. I hope that answered your question okay.
It does look like Tracy has a couple of follow-up questions.
Sorry, Tracy, you asked how many students can we currently serve under this contract. The agreement we have with Unit 4 is not structured around ridership, but hours of service provided and neighborhoods served. So we agree to provide Unit 4 with service to different neighborhoods such as Dobbins Downs or Curtis Meadows. It's not limited on the number of passengers. Really, it's a function of how many operators we have, so it determines how many buses we can run, and the number of buses determines how many hours of service we charge Unit 4 for the service. So currently, any student that lives within the school district further than 1.5 miles away from their school can apply for an MTD sticker to get on their student ID so that they can board a school-specific trip to and from their school. And as for how many passengers we serve daily on average, I would have to look into it and get back to you. Some of our routes have articulated vehicles and regularly serve over 70 students every morning, whereas other routes only serve 10 to 15, and that can change from year to year as well, as the demographics in one neighborhood might have a lot of middle school kids one year and then a lot of high school kids the next, and then 5 years later another route is the really busy one. But feel free to submit a comment online too if you had questions about a more specific route or neighborhood, or you can also contact me directly if you call MTD and ask for Dan Sapphire.
And Tracy, I do see one other question about only 35 routes in 22 and 23. I'm not sure I understand that question.
Tracy, you're referring to our school routes for Unit 4 and District 116? Total 35 school routes.
Yeah, Tracy. Okay, so Tracy asks that daily on a regular dismissal, we would operate 35 school trips, and that on early out days, we would provide an additional 2 to 4 additional school trips. So this is referring to Unit 4's different dismissal schedules. So on a day like today, their middle school and high school dismiss 2 hours early. And that is more resource intensive for us because to save both Unit 4 and 116 money, we chain their school trips together. So we'll serve an Urbana middle school and then a Champaign high school or vice versa. But when one of the districts moves their dismissal time up 2 hours, it breaks that ability to share a trip, between the two districts. And we need to make our own kind of standalone trips just for Unit 4, which requires more buses and just makes those early dismissal days more resource intensive than a regular dismissal day when everyone gets out at 2:30 or 3:20. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect.
Thank you again, Dan and Dave. Are there any other questions or feedback that we can address for anyone this afternoon? All right, well, I would like to thank everyone for taking time out of the lunch hour to attend our virtual live public hearing. Again, if you have any questions or feedback, thoughts, questions, you can submit those to us online. You can give us a phone call, or you can come see us down at Illinois Terminal on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. I'd like to thank everyone again for attending, and we will have this recording available on our website very soon.